The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome back to Dave and Meckie's Shiny Side Out on Freedom Slips on Revolution Radio, which is the website revolution.radio. And we're in the chat room right now, and this is episode number 572.
Wonderful. Now, that gets us right.
Wunderbar.
Wunderbar. The Third Reich and the occult. There's a bit of a preamble here. Then we'll get stuck into the meat of it. It's been expanded a little bit. But let's start this way. We're seeing today the erosion of our systems before our very eyes. The separation of powers is vanishing. Different sets of rules apply to different people. Truth and facts have become arbitrary concepts no longer agreed upon by all. We can all have our own facts. Whatever suits us best, really. This erosion and intellectual bankruptcy are accelerated by instantaneous communications and everybody's ability to participate to their heart's content. Now, normally, that would be amazing. But most people are no longer the critical and rational thinkers they need to be to wield that kind of power. Opinion is truth, and uneducated opinion is gospel. As the world is rapidly devolving into ever more authoritarian regimes with a clear polarization at the extreme ends of the spectrum, it behooves us to check in again on a show we did 5 years ago. Nazism almost sank the world, but what were its ideological roots? What was of the heart of it? And is it happening again? Dave.
Oh, well, occultism in Nazism. Nazism and occultism describes a range of theories, speculation and research into the origins of Nazism and its possible relation to various occult traditions. Such ideas have been part of the popular culture since at least the early 1940s and gained renewed popularity starting in the 1960s. There are documentaries and books on the topic. Among the most significant are The Morning of the Magicians from 1960 and The Spear of Destiny, 1972. Nazism and occultism has also been featured in numerous films, novels, comic books, and other fictional media. Perhaps the most prominent example is the film Raiders of the Lost Ark. Meckie, I know that's one of your favourites. Historian Nicholas Goodrick Clark analysed the topic in The Occult Roots of Nazism, in which he argued there were in fact links between some ideals of Aristophy. Is that Aristophy? Aristophy?
Yep.
All right. And Nazi ideology. He also analysed the problems of the numerous popular occult historiography books written on the topic. He sought to separate empiricism and sociology from the modern mythology of Nazi occultism that exists in many books which have represented the Nazi phenomenon as the product of arcane and demonic influence. He considered most of these to be sensational and under-researched. Meckie.
Gottfried Clark, the Völkisch movement in Ariosophy. Now, the Völkisch means populace or popular, as in relation to a people. right? So when it says Volk, it means a people. So Völkisch is of the people, if you will. Historian Nicholas Goodrich Clarke's 1985 book, The Occult Roots of Nazism, discussed the possibility of links between the ideas of the occult and those of Nazism. The book's main subject was the racist occult movement of Ariosophy, a major strand of nationalist esotericism in Germany and Austria during the 1800s and early 1900s. He described his work as an underground history concerned with the myths, symbols, and fantasies that bear on the development of reactionary, authoritarian, and Nazi styles of thinking. He focused on this unexamined topic of history because fantasies can achieve a causal status once they have been institutionalized in beliefs, values, and social groups. He describes the Völkisch movement as a sort of anti-modernist, anti-liberal reaction to the many political, social, and economic changes occurring in Germanic Europe in the late 1800s. Part of his argument is that the rapid industrialization and rise of cities changed the traditional rural social order and ran into conflict with the pre-capitalist attitudes and institutions of the area. He described the racially elitist pan-Germanism movement of ethnic German Austrians as a reaction to Austria not being included in the German Empire of Bismarck. Godric Clarke opined that the Ariosophists movement took Völkisch ideas but added occultish themes about things like Freemasonry, Kabbalism, and Rosicrucianism in order to prove the modern world was based on false and evil principles. The Ariosophist ideas and symbols filtered through to several anti-Semitic and nationalist groups in the late Wilhelminian Germany, from which the early Nazi party emerged in Munich after the First World War. He showed some links between two Ariosophists and Heinrich Himmler.
That's completely true. The Thule Society. The Thule Society, originally can you pronounce it for me, Becky?
Thule-Gesellschaft.
And originally die
Studiengruppe für Germanisches Altertum,
which is the study group for Germanic antiquity, was a German occultist and Volkisch group founded in Munich right after World War I, named after the mythical northern country in Greek legend. The society is notable chiefly as the organization that sponsored the Deutsche Arbeiterpartei.
Very good.
DAP, as it's known, German Workers' Party, which was later reorganized by Adolf Hitler into the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP or Nazi Party. According to Hitler biographer Ian Kershaw, the organization's member list reads like a who's who of early Nazi sympathizers and leading figures in Munich, including Rudolf Hess, Alfred Rosenberg, Hans Frank, Julius Lehmann, Gottfried, you almost rolled my R's there, Fieder, Dietrich Eckart, and Karl Harrer. However, Nicholas Goodrich Clarke contends that Hans Frank and Rudolf Hess had been Thule members, but other leading Nazis had only been invited to speak at the Thule meetings, or they were entirely unconnected with it. According to Johann Höring, there is no evidence that Hitler even attended the Thule Society. Becky?
Origins of the Thule Society. The society was originally a German study group headed by Walter Nauhaus, a wounded World War I veteran turned art student from Berlin, who had become a keeper of pedigrees for the Germanenorden, or the Order of the Teutons, a secret society founded in 1911 and formally named in the following year. In 1917, Nauhaus moved to Munich. his Tula Society was to be a cover name for the Munich branch of the Germanenorden. But events developed different as a result of a schism in the order. In 1918, Nauhaus was contacted in Munich by Rudolf von Sebottendorf, an occultist and newly elected head of the Bavarian province of the schismatic offshoot known as the Germanenorden Wahlvater of the Holy Grail. They really liked long names. The two men became associates in a recruitment campaign, and Sebottendorf adopted Nauhaus's Tula Society as a cover name for his Munich lodge of the Germanenorden Wahlvater at its formal dedication on August 18, 1918. Okay?
Yeah, beliefs. A primary focus of the Tula Society was a claim concerning the origins of the Aryan race. In 1917, people who wanted to join the Germanic order, out of which the Tula Society developed in 1918, had to sign a special blood declaration of faith concerning their lineage. And there's a quote here. The signer hereby swears to the best of his knowledge and belief that no Jewish or coloured blood flows in his or in his wife's veins, and that among their ancestors are no members of the coloured races. Wow.
I know, right?
Yeah. And like the Thula, or Greek, and I can't read, it's in Greek, was a land located by Greco-Roman geographers in the farthest north, often displayed as Iceland. The Latin term ultimate Thula, English most distant Thula, is also mentioned by Roman poet Virgil in his pastoral poems called the Georgics. Thula originally was probably the name for Scandinavia, although Virgil simply uses it as a proverbial expression for the edge of the known world, and his mention should not be taken as a substantial reference to Scandinavia. The Thula Society identified Ultima Thule as a lost ancient landmass in the extreme north near Greenland or Iceland, said by the Nazi mystics to be the capital of ancient Hyperborea. These ideas were derived from earlier speculation by Ignatius L. Donnelly, his work with Donnelly, that a lost landmass had once existed in the Atlantic, and it was the home of the Aryan race, a theory which he supported by reference to the distribution of swastika motifs. Motifs, not motives. Tula was considered to be the capital city of Hyperborea, the land beyond the poles, which is impossible. The original land of the Aryan race as it was in the pre-misty dawns of history before that 100,000-year cutoff mark that Ramtha has mentioned. Geez, I want to know more about that now. In the purest form, Hyperborea represented the archetypal powers of the universe. It is the locale where the ancient Ida race is first said to have interacted genetically with the indigenous race of Earth and created the amalgamated human we know today. From such a pre-dawn civilization that did, however, become the indigenous race on Earth, that the Anunnaki then decided to tinker with it. He identified this with Plato's Atlantis, a theory further developed by Helena Blavatsky, an occultist during the second part of the 19th century. And so, wait a minute, So they're saying that the Ida race genetically altered the creatures to be close to human, and then the Anunnaki made further changes?
That's what they believed.
Wow.
No, bear in mind that was their belief system, right?
No, look at that. Hey, wait a minute. So that's actually pretty cool. So maybe that is true.
Maybe.
It sounds a little crazy, right? It's a little new to a lot of you, but the fact that they even mentioned the Anunnaki is remarkable, because our religions don't mention them at all. In fact, they just say God and then they delete all that genetic modification business.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
In fact, they talk about the giants, the sons of God, when really they're talking about the Greeks, right? But no, you're right.
Yeah.
100%.
That's something.
100%.
That's some really good info right there.
The Tulip Society attracted about 250 followers in Munich and about 1,500 elsewhere in Bavaria. It's about how many people listen to the show. The followers of the Tulip Society were very interested in racial theory and, in particular, in combating Jews and communists. The Bottendorf planned but failed to kidnap Bavarian Socialist Prime Minister Kurt Eisner in December 1918. During the Bavarian Revolution of April 1919, Tulists were accused of trying to infiltrate its government and of attempting a coup. On April 26, the communist government in Munich raided the society's premises and took 7 of its members into custody, executing them on April 30th. Amongst them were Walter Neuhaus and 4 well-known aristocrats, including Countess Heila von Westarp, who functioned as the group's secretary, and Prince Gustav of Thurn und Taxis, who was related to several European royal families. In response, the Thule organized a citizens' uprising as white troops entered the city on May 1.
Oh, the Münchener Beobachter newspaper. I nearly pronounced it correctly. Don't hate me.
Oh, good.
In 1980, thank you. In 1980, the Tulip Society bought a local weekly newspaper, the aforementioned newspaper, the Munich Observer, and changed its name to, please, Mecki?
Münchner Beobachter und Sportblatt.
There you go, the Munich Observer and sports paper. Got to include sport in there.
That's right.
In an attempt to improve its circulation. There you go. It's a ratings grab. The paper later became the
Völkischer Beobachter. So it went from a Munich Observer to People's Observer.
Right, yes, People's Observer. The main Nazi newspaper. It was edited by Karl Harrer.
Excellent. Deutsche Arbeiterpartei. Anton Drexler had developed links between the Tulip Society and various extreme right workers organizations in Munich. He established the Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, DAP, German Workers' Party, on January 5, 1919. Together with the Tulip Society's Karl Harrer, Adolf Hitler joined this party in September the same year. By the end of February 1920, the Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, the German Workers' Party, had been reconstituted as the Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, or NSDAP, or National Socialist German Workers' Party, often referred to as the abbreviated Nazi Party. And from here on forward, we shall call it the Nazi Party because it's so much easier. The Bottendorf by then had left the Tulip Society and never joined the Nazi Party, or the DAP before that. Dietrich Bronder, who wrote Before Hitler Came, 1964, alleged that other members of the Tulip Society were later prominent in Nazi Germany. That list includes Dietrich Eckart, who coached Hitler on his public speaking skills, along with Erich Jan Hanussen, and had Mein Kampf dedicated to him. So that's what Hitler did.
Mm-hmm.
As well as Gottfried Feder, Hans Frank, Hermann Göring, Karl Haushofer, Rudolf Hess, Heinrich Himmler, and Alfred Rosenberg. Historian Nicholas Goddard Clark has described this membership role and similar claims as spurious and fanciful, noting that Feder, Eckhart, and Rosenberg were never more than guests to whom the Tulip Society extended hospitality during the Bavarian Revolution of 1918, although he has more recently acknowledged that Hess and Frank were members of the society before they came to prominence in the Nazi Party. So Nicholas Goddard Clark, if you read his work, is very much skeptical of the occult links, etc., which is fine. Unfortunately, though, if you are extending hospitality to people during a revolution, during a hard time, then I think you can deduct, without being too fanciful, that you like those people, and those people have the same ideas that you do. So whether or not they were members is largely irrelevant. They clearly had the same beliefs, and they were clearly held in high regard by the Tulip Society. Otherwise, they would not have protected them, I would imagine. So you can, sorry to digress, but the funny thing is, whenever these things come up and something needs to be disproved, Dave, people always like to look at the detail. Like, oh, yeah, but he was never a member of the party, you see. Oh, but he never really carried a gun, you see. Oh, but, well, we don't really know if he flew that plane on that day.
He was a guest.
He never carried a lighter. So it's spurious at best, in my opinion. But nonetheless, here we are. It has also been claimed that Adolf Hitler himself was a member. Evidence on the contrary shows that he never attended a meeting, as attested by Johannes Hering's Diary of Society meetings. It is quite clear that Hitler himself had little interest in and little time for esoteric matters. See also Hitler's Nuremberg speech of September 6, 1938, on his disapproval of occultism. I will respectfully disagree with that statement, because if you are a student of history in any sense, and you look at the Nazi gatherings, especially before the Nazis came to power, but even more so, I guess, once they were in power, they are laced. They are drowning in esoteric meaning. Okay, they're the banners, the swastika, the lighting, as it were, the fires that were burned. All of it is highly ritual or ritualistic, and it has deep, significant occult meanings.
Did you see the Biden speech when he had the red and the black and the fires burning in the same lighting?
No, I haven't.
Oh, I'll dig it up.
Yeah, please. Wow. Okay. Now, Wilhelm Laforce and Max Sesselmann, which were staff on the Munich Observer, were Tulip members who later joined the Nazi Party. Dave?
Yes. So disillusion. Early in 1920, Karl Hara was forced out of the DAP as Hitler moved to sever the party's link with the Tulip Society, which subsequently fell into decline and was dissolved about 5 years later, well before Hitler came to power. Rudolf von Sebottendorf had withdrawn from the Tulip Society in 1919, but he returned to Germany in 1933 in the hope of reviving it. In that year, he published a book entitled Bevor Hitler kam, in German, Before Hitler Came, in English, in which he claimed that the Tulip Society had paved the way for the Führer. Tulips were the ones whom Hitler first came, and Tulips were the first to unite themselves with Hitler. That's what he says. This claim was not favourably received by the Nazi authorities. In 1933, esoteric organisations were suppressed, including the Volkisch occultists. Many closed down by anti-Masonic legislation in 1935. Sebottendorf his book was prohibited, and he himself was arrested and imprisoned for a short period in 1934, afterwards departing into exile in Turkey A. Nonetheless, it has been argued that some Tula members and their ideas were incorporated into the Third Reich. Some of the Tula Society's teachings were expressed in the books of Alfred Rosenberg. Many occult ideas found favour with Heinrich Himmler, who had a great interest in mysticism. Unlike Hitler, but the Schützenstaffel SS under Himmler emulated the structure of Ignatius Loyal's Jesuit order rather than the Tula Society according to Hone.
The next article is new, and we haven't read this to you guys before. It was taken from, tell you where it was taken from. The website is called, there you go, Museum of Tolerance.com. So if you want to have a look there, Museum of Tolerance. And it's actually I guess, part of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, if you're interested, which was the Nazi hunter. So I think it's a very interesting perspective that we are going to enjoy here. Okay, so Hitler's Racial Ideology, Content, and Occult Sources by Jackson Spielvogel and David Raddles. In a 1931 interview with a Leipzig newspaper editor, Adolf Hitler made a passionate declaration of the true significance of his National Socialist movement. This is a quote. The Frenchman Gobineau and the Englishman Chamberlain were inspired by our concept of a new order. A new order, I tell you, or if you prefer, an ideological glimpse into history in accordance with the basic principles of the blood. We do not judge by merely artistic or military standards, or even by purely scientific ones. We judge by the spiritual energy which a people is capable of putting forth, which will enable it in 10 years to recapture what it has lost in 1,000 years of warfare. I intend to set up a 1,000-year Reich, and anyone who supports me in battle is a fellow fighter for a unique, spiritual, I would almost say divine creation. At the decisive moment, the decisive factor is not the ratio of strength, but the spiritual force employed. Betrayal of the nation is possible even when no crime has been committed. In other words, when a historical mission has not been fulfilled. This statement by Hitler gives rise to several intriguing questions. What was the basic principle of the blood which inspired Hitler's new order? What did he mean by the spiritual energy of the people and how it was connected to their blood? Why did Hitler envision his movement as generating a spiritual and even divine creation that would fulfill a historic mission? What was the relationship between the basic principle of the blood and Hitler's fanatical hatred of Jews? And finally, what were the sources of these ideas, assuming, of course, that Hitler was influenced by the philosophies of others? Is it possible that occult or esoteric racial philosophy may in fact have been one of the major sources for Hitler's racial ideology? In this paper, we shall attempt to provide some answers to these questions. It is evident from Mein Kampf and Hitler's speeches that he viewed racial conflict as the determining factor in all of human history. The racial question gives the key not only to world history, but to all human culture. Race was not simply a political issue to be used to carry the favor of the masses, but the granite foundation of Hitler's ideology. Hitler's racial ideology stemmed from what he called the basic principle of the blood. This meant that the blood of every person in every race contained the soul of a person and likewise the soul of his race, the Volk. Hitler believed that the Aryan race, to which all true Germans belonged, was the race whose blood or soul was of the highest degree. God himself had in fact created the Aryans as the most perfect men, both physically and spiritually. Since the blood or soul of the Aryans contained specific spiritual energies, the cultural energies or racial primal elements, as Hitler often called them, the Aryans supplied the culture that creates the beauty and dignity of higher humanity. In other words, all that man calls higher culture was ultimately the product of the spiritual and creative energies that exist in the blood of the Aryans. Hitler stated the following: all the human culture, all the results of art, science, and technology that we see before us today are almost exclusively the creative product of the Aryan. This very fact admits of the not unfounded inference that he alone was the founder of all higher humanity, therefore representing the prototype of all that we understand by the word man. He is the Prometheus of mankind, from whose bright forehead the divine spark of genius has sprung at all times. Exclude him, and perhaps after a few thousand years darkness will again descend on the earth. Human cultures will pass and the world will turn into a desert. Human culture and civilization on this continent are inseparably bound up with the presence of the Aryan. If he dies out or declines, the dark veils of an age without culture will again descend on this globe. That's the end of that quote, Dave.
Indeed, this dying off of the Aryans was what Adolf Hitler perceived as happening around him. Germany's loss of World War I and subsequent economic problems were the visible contemporary evidence of Aryan decline. This descent occurred by the original sin of blood poisoning, or the contamination of the Aryan blood or soul by an inferior race. The Aryan gave up the purity of his blood and, therefore, lost his sojourn in the paradise which he made for himself. He became submerged in the racial mixture and gradually, more and more, lost his cultural capacity until at last, not only mentally but also physically, he began to resemble the subjected Aborigines more than his own ancestors. Thus, cultures and empires collapsed to make place for new formations. Blood mixture and the resultant drop in the racial level is the sole cause of the dying out of old cultures. For men do not perish as a result of lost wars, but by the loss of that force of resistance which is contained only in pure blood. All who are not of good race in this world are chaff. The serpent that brought about the contamination of pure Aryan blood was, of course, the Jew, according to the text. The mightiest counterpart to the Aryan is represented by the Jew. To Hitler, the Jews were, of course, not members of a particular religious creed, but a specific race. The Jew has always been a people with definite racial characteristics and never a religion. Only in order to get ahead, he early sought for a means which could distract unpleasant attention from his person, and what would have been more expedient and at the same time more innocent than the embezzled concepts of a religious community. For here, too, everything is borrowed, or rather stolen. Due to his original special nature, the Jew cannot possess a religious institution, if for no other reason because he lacks idealism in any form. And hence belief in a hereafter is absolutely foreign to him. And a religion, in the Aryan sense, cannot be imagined which lacks the conviction of survival after death in some form. Becky.
From Hitler's perspective, the Jewish race was not created by God as one of the original root races of mankind, and was, in his mind, ungodly, inhuman, the embodiment of all that was evil. Hence, the Jew, again quoting here, stops at nothing, and in his vileness he becomes so gigantic that no one need be surprised if among our people the personification of the devil as the symbol of all evil assumes the living shape of the Jew. The goal of the Jews was the domination of the world, a task that could be achieved by the poisoning of Aryan blood. Hitler contended that the Jews used a variety of methods to accomplish this task. The most blatant was miscegenation, accomplished by Jewish rape of Aryan girls and Jewish importation of blacks into Germany in order to further destroy Aryan purity and carry out this kind of disarming of the spirituality leading class of his racial adversaries. To Hitler, the Jewish race was also attempting to poison the Aryan blood soul by utilizing social methods such as cultural and political means. The Jew was the fundamental cause of the decadence that Hitler saw in modern art and literature. To Hitler, Jewish modern art was a deliberate attempt to infect the unconsciousness or inner self of the Aryan people. Culturally, he contaminates art. It's a quote again. Literature, the theater, makes a mockery of natural feeling, overthrows all concepts of beauty and sublimity of the noble and the good, and instead drags man down into the sphere of his own base nature. End quote. But it is in this area of politics that Hitler perceived the greatest Jewish threat to the Aryan race. Jewish infiltration of the bourgeoisie had made the latter puppets for the execution of the Jewish plan for world domination. Thus, the bourgeoisie economic institution of capitalism and the political institution of liberalism, democracy, parliamentarism, freedom of the press, and internationalism were all Jewish instruments creating disorder in the world as a stepping stone to domination. By far the most powerful political tool of the Jewish race, however, was Marxism. Marxism was a rival Weltanschauung or worldview that created a view of life directly hostile to everything in which Hitler believed. Marxism to Hitler maintained that the state had in itself the creative culture-forming force, meaning that the state created a nation's culture out of economic necessities. In Hitler's view, the state could not create a nation's culture, since nation was the outward manifestation of a race's, a folk's inner nature of soul. The state then could only be the instrument by which a race could express its cultural energies. The state's primary function was to preserve and promote those Aryan culture creating spiritual elements that existed in the blood of the Aryan race. And there's another quote here, Dave.
I'll take the quotes, yeah. The state is a means to an end. Its end lies in the preservation and advancement of a community of physically and psychically homogeneous creatures. This preservation itself comprises first of all existence as a race and thereby permits the free development of all the forces dormant in this race. Thus, the highest purpose of a folkish state is concern for the preservation of those original racial elements which bestow culture and create the beauty and dignity of a higher mankind. We, as Aryans, can conceive of the state only as the living organism of a nationality which not only assures the preservation of this nationality, but by the development of its spiritual and ideal abilities leads to the highest freedom.
Hitler also deplored Marxism for its belief in racial equality. Obviously, racial inequality and Aryan domination did not permit such misunderstanding of the role of race in history. Likewise, Hitler denounced Marxism's leveling egalitarianism, which he felt destroyed the natural principles of inequality and the consequent domination of some individuals, an elite, over others. Hitler saw the Marxist threat to Aryan culture creating ability not as coincidental, but as a deliberate plan to destroy culture, bring civilization into chaos, and enable the Jews to achieve their goal of world domination. To Hitler, the Jew Karl Marx knew precisely what policies would lead the world to chaos. Another quote.
Actually, Karl Marx was only the one among millions who, with the sure eye of the prophet, recognized in the morass of a slowly decomposing world that the most essential poisons extracted them, and, like a wizard, prepared them into a concentrated solution for the swifter annihilation of the independent existence of free nations on this earth, and all this in service of his race.
In conjunction with his racial ideology and anti-Semitism, Hitler often spoke of an historic or higher mission of the Aryan race and its elite core, the German people. The Aryans, according to Hitler, were once rulers of the earth, the highest race of mankind, empowered with the highest degree of spiritual qualities, and the only ones capable of producing a higher civilization. Aryans were, in essence, God-men on earth, but through blood poisoning lost their ruling position. However, as its higher mission, the German people were destined to regain this position for the Aryan race. To do so, Germany must restructure its political and social foundations and create a state whose function was to promote the Aryan culture, creating spiritual elements that exist in the blood of the German race. If this were done racially and thus spiritually pure human beings could be produced, ensuring Aryan world domination. But if this Aryan destiny were to be fulfilled, Hitler believed, one major obstacle would have to be dealt with: the Jew. The Jew was the poison of the blood or soul of the Aryan race, thus inhibiting this spiritual growth and endangering its divine destiny. Since Hitler saw all Jewish action as racially and thus spiritually motivated, it became his divine mission to create an Aryan spiritual movement to combat the Jewish race. Hitler believed that his Nazi party, founded as a spiritual movement, would successfully rise to German political dominance, since it was based in his mind on eternally true ideals rooted in the very soul of the Aryan race. Once in power, the Nazi movement could then create a state that would foster the historic destiny of the Aryan race. And the first task of this Aryan state would be to eliminate the Jewish threat. This is why Hitler's political career began and ended with a warning against the Jewish danger. In a letter dated September 16, 1919, called the first piece of writing of Hitler's political career, Hitler was quite clear about his motives. The ultimate goal of a rational anti-Semitism must unalterably be the elimination of the Jews altogether. Yes?
At the very end of his career, when he wrote his political testament to the German people, his preoccupation with the Jewish threat was still uppermost in his mind. Quoted, "Above all, I bind the leadership of the nation and those under them to a meticulous observance of the racial laws and to merciless opposition to the universal prisoners of all peoples, international Jewry." That's the end of the quote. The final solution of the Jewish question, namely the genocide of the Jewish race in Europe, takes on its proper significance as the final logical product of Hitler's racial ideology. Once the Jew was purged from Europe, Germany would be able to produce pure Aryans who would be physically and spiritually perfect human beings. And thus, Hitler's new order would be established with spiritually pure Aryans, demigod rulers who, as Hitler enigmatically expressed it, having achieved possession of this earth, will have a free path for activity in domains which will lie partly above it and partly outside it, end quote. This last statement is a reminder that Hitler suggested on occasion that there was a deeper cosmic significance to his new order, National Socialism. He once exclaimed to Otto Strasser, "Would be worth nothing if it were restricted merely to Germany and did not seal the supremacy of the superior race over the entire world for at least 1,000 to 2,000 years." Even in Mein Kampf, Hitler hinted that such a master race would have to make the last and greatest decisions on earth, unquote. Are these statements the fanciful flights of words of one who was accustomed to lack of proportion and moderation? Or are they the reflection of some of the sources that influenced the development of Hitler's ideas on racial ideology? Mecki.
So much has been written about the sources for Hitler's racial ideology and other ideas that the standard histories of the Third Reich and the numerous biographies of Adolf Hitler seem content to repeat a well-established litany of people and movements that may have influenced Hitler's thought. Indeed, the composer Richard Wagner, the philosophers Friedrich Nietzsche and Arthur Schopenhauer, the Viennese politicians Georg von Schönerer and Karl Lueger, the racial philosophers Joseph Arthur Gobineau and Houston Stewart Chamberlain, extreme nationalism, social Darwinism, and racism in general are all regularly cited as his main sources. Since Hitler rarely specified his sources, scholars have resorted to indicating similarities and parallels in order to document these influences. The suggestion made in the 1950s by Joachim Besser and the early 1960s by George Moss that an examination of the impact of occult or esoteric philosophies, especially current in Vienna and Munich in the late 19th century and early 20th century on Hitler and early National Socialism might indeed be a more fruitful line of approach to the problem, has not been widely pursued by academic historians. I wonder why, Dave. Recently, however, Jeffrey Goldstein and James Webb have emphasized the importance of occultism in general in the emergence of Nazi ideology. We would like to argue that occult or esoteric racial philosophy may indeed have been one of the major sources for Hitler's racial ideology. Hitler himself may have been partly responsible for leading historians away from investigating esoteric influences. It is well known that Hitler criticized occultists, Freemasons, and astrologers, and even persecuted some of them when he came into power. And yet, in his nightly monologues to his assembled guests, Hitler revealed his belief in the very ideas that these groups were perpetrating. Ample evidence of this is provided in his references to reincarnation, the lost continent of Atlantis, and Hans Herbike's world ice theory, as well as in his conviction that the early myths and legends of cosmic disasters and struggles between giants and gods are actually mankind's vague memory of a disaster that destroyed a humanity that already possessed an advanced degree of civilization. Sounds like us, though.
Mm-hmm.
A large variety of occult or esoteric groups and philosophies existed in German-speaking lands from the 1890s into the 1920s. One of the most influential schools of thought came out of the work established by Russian Helena Blavatsky. Blavatsky, who had immersed herself deeply in esoteric spiritual beliefs from all over the world, formed the universal esoteric philosophy, which she called Theosophy, wisdom of the gods. She viewed it as the revival of an ancient occult knowledge derived from an earlier, advanced civilization, which had known a unity between science and religion. See, this is where we made the mistake, the split between mind or the spiritual side and the physical world. That's where we went off the rails as a society. Anyway, in 1875, Blavatsky and Colonel Henry Alcott founded the Theosophical Society in New York City. Its purpose was to collect and diffuse the previously secret knowledge of the laws governing the universe. After the establishment of the first Theosophic Lodge in 1884 in Germany, the movement spread rapidly in that country. 1884. In her esoteric work, especially The Secret Doctrine, originally published in 1888, Blavatsky emphasized the concept of races as paramount in the development of human history. According to Blavatsky, there are 7 root races of mankind, with each root race containing 7 sub-races. The present root race is the 5th, the Aryan, which was preceded by the 4th, or Atlantean race. Dave?
The Aryans evolved from the 5th subrace of the Atlanteans. According to Blavatsky, the Aryan race was born and developed in the far north. Though, after the sinking of the continent of Atlantis, its tribes immigrated further south into Asia. The Aryans, following a migratory pattern, then went south and west from Asia, ultimately created the great Hindu, Persian, Greco-Roman, and later European cultures. Hitler, like his party ideologist Alfred Rosenberg, also claimed Aryan origins for all of these cultures. Each root race is seen by Blavatsky as being constituted differently in a physical and spiritual sense. In the earliest times, man was purely spirit. Then at some point in time, this spirit entered and animated physical matter. Man thus evolved. In Blavatsky's cosmology, from the ethereal to the material. The original spirituality of man can be seen, according to Blavatsky, in the fact that mankind once was endowed with psychic powers, which she attributed to the so-called Cyclopean eye. We call it the third eye, I suppose. With the Cyclopean eye, man had spiritual sight, the ability to perceive subtle realities of the spiritual world, and thus could see into the future and read minds. Blavatsky felt that as man evolved materially and intellectually, this third eye atrophied to what is now the pineal gland, and man mostly lost his psychic powers, or they calcified. But, stated Blavatsky's, mankind is destined to regain these abilities, that Hitler was well versed in these racial peculiarities and demonstrated in one of Hermann Rauschning's conversations with Hitler that goes, Mackie?
This is the quote. The pursuit of the random path of the intelligence, we learned, was the real defection of man from his divine mission. To have magic insight was apparently Hitler's idea of the goal of human progress. He himself felt that he already had the rudiments of his gift. He attributed to it his successes and his future eminence. A savant of Munich had also written some curious stuff about the prehistoric world, about forms of perception and supernatural powers. There was the Eye of Cyclops, or median eye, the organ of magic perception of the infinite, now reduced to a rudimentary pineal gland. Speculations of this sort fascinated Hitler, and he would sometimes be entirely wrapped up in them. He saw his own remarkable career as a confirmation of hidden powers. He saw himself as chosen for superhuman tasks, as the prophet of the rebirth of man in new form. Okay.
Yes, with 3 minutes left.
In that case, let's pause it here, shall we?
Yes.
It's still quite a bit to go. But I don't know. It's what can we take from this at this point?
Do you know what I find is extraordinary? That they mention the Anunnaki, number one. They mentioned a pre-existing of a high technology, which is what we believe, you and I.
Yes.
Also, the pineal gland, yes, and the third eye, and the psychic abilities.
Yes.
All of this you can kind of call it an occult, or the occult, I suppose.
Yes. Yes.
It's because it's been hidden from us. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
We can't. I'm still surprised that these were and was quoted out of Hitler's mouth during discussions and dinner parties that he had.
Yes,
these were his impressions of the world around him.
There's a great book called Hitler's Table Talk by Rauschning. If you answer it, Hitler's Table Talk. You're 100% correct. See, we like to sweep all of this stuff under the carpet. Now ask yourself why that is. right? And again, I am actually, while I'm not an adherent of theosophy and not necessarily a student of Blavatsky, I do agree very much with many of the teachings that theosophy has been disseminating. And I'm not the only one that agrees with that either. And that's certainly reincarnation, as well as the original form that we had, be it pure energy or however you want to describe it. And then we were somehow trapped in these physical bodies. We discussed this many times. Many, many times. Where Hitler and I part company is the blood poisoning or the soul poisoning aspect. Because I don't think that is the case. I think we're devolving. Once we entered the material world, and that's really the thing is, you can't divorce any content from any other content. Now let me explain. So we are pure energy.
No,
let's say, for argument's sake.
There's
right?
music.
Just a minute. Oh, jeez. There it is. Okay, well, look, we'll finish this next week. So we won't finish it.
We're going to explain it next week. Upcoming next is Jer Bear's Awesome Show After Hours. And we're going to catch you on Tuesday morning and Thursday morning for Plato's Cave, 7 a.m. your time in Eastern time in the US. All right? Till then, take care and be safe.